Okay, hi everyone. I'm here with my good friend Mark Flannery. We've probably known each other for 20 years. I remember when Mark first graduated and we met at a seminar. Mark is a very successful functional medicine practitioner. I have my patients begging to have me call him to get him into his practice, and he's done some favors for me over the past. So, Mark, nice to have you join us.
Thanks
And
for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be
Mark,
here.
so tell me about your journey. So I remember, from what I remember, the first time we met, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it was like in Las Vegas. I think it was at the MGM Hotel. I was teaching a seminar there. And then I remember you telling the story. So tell me if it's correct. And then I needed a laser pointer. And then like I lost mine or didn't bring mine. And you had one. And I'm like, hey, what's your story? And then I think we got to know each other. And from that point on, I started to realize like you were coming to the seminars and you were really asking me all these complicated good questions, and I'm like, wow, you're really getting this information to the point where you ended up teaching the seminar circuit
Yeah.
with Apex. So is that correct, or am I missing
Yeah.
something?
I mean, very, 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 very close. I started coming to your seminars. We didn't really know each other that well. And Vegas was when I first was like, all right, I'm on board. I got to follow this guy wherever he goes. So I flew out to Vegas, and that's where I got to know you a little bit more. And then we were in Santa Monica one time. Yeah, your laser pointer went dead. I walked up, I gave you one, and that's where we kind of started the conversation. Of you were like, hey, are you okay getting up in front of people and talking in front of people? And then that's where the conversation started as far as teaching for you and Apex. And
So what year was that? Do you remember?
I want to say about 2007, somewhere around there
2007. Okay.
ish.
So when did you graduate chiropractic school? You went to LA, Southern California, SUHS or
uh,
LACC?
yeah. So graduated Cleveland
Cleveland,
in
that's right.
2006.
2000. Okay, so you graduated Cleveland, 2006. So you were in the seminars right away, right out of school.
Yeah, I was going while I was still in school.
Did you know when you were in school that you were going to practice clinical nutrition, functional medicine, or anything like that, or no?
No, I went to school for chiropractic. I was just going to come out be a straight chiropractor. That was the
Just spinal
thought.
manipulation, muscle skeletal stuff.
That was the plan. I
So
did some AK stuff, while I was in school and got exposed to doing some AK and that. But so there's some nutrition involved with AK and that aspect of it. So I was exposed to some of it, but for the most part, I was going to be a straight chiropractor.
so then what happened? How did you end up at
I
a
couldn't help everybody. Got some people well, and some people weren't getting well. I do the same modalities on this person that I'm doing on this person, and one person gets well, the other person doesn't. Why not? So I started asking the questions why. Why, and that led me to believe that different people are in a different metabolic state and can receive the treatment differently. And so then how do I make shifts in their metabolic state in order to allow them to get better and receive the treatments better? And as I was exploring those different avenues as to where am I going to get this education, because you don't get it in chiropractic school, how am I going to educate myself to do this? I came across your seminars, and when I heard you speak, I was like, this is the guy. And so that's when I really just started following your seminar. I did a lot of other ones too, but it was really you that got down to the nuts and bolts of back down to like physiology and how are we going to make these shifts in physiology, what truly is going on, how are we going to evaluate and know what's going on. And so that's kind of what led me down that road. And then I was in practice with my wife. She also went through chiropractic school, my wife at the time. And so we decided to split the practice, and she was going to do all the musculoskeletal stuff, and I was going to go do all the nutrition stuff. And so very early on, I would say probably by 2009, I wasn't doing any really straight chiropractic anymore. I was doing all nutrition.
So like 3 years into practice, you were just doing nutrition, functional medicine, basically reading lab work, reading blood tests, and those things, right? And then the seminar you first went in 2006, was that blood chemistry or was that functional endocrinology? What was the seminar?
Well, the first seminar I went to was, I don't know what you called it. It was the HPA Access. Basically, it was a 2-hour seminar.
Oh, okay.
And
Right.
so
Yeah, I remember back then it was like I think somewhere in early 2000s I got approached by Apex saying, "Hey, will you help us build some products for nutrition and help us with some seminars?" And then the seminars were successful. And then it was like, "Okay, we have all these like cities we want you to go to. Can you build a team?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I remember thinking, I'm not building a team unless they're a real practitioner practicing. I don't need the professional speaker that can, well, I need like someone within like the first 5 minutes when they hear me speak. And if you're in practice, yeah, that guy's in the trenches. That guy's really doing this. This guy knows what we're really facing. So that's why I was really attracted to really bring you on board because I know you were doing this stuff, and to this day I know you were doing this stuff because we've worked with different patients together. And then I see your files and I'm like, man, Mark did a freaking great workup, man. This is a good job. He's giving good patient education material. He's done all these things, so it was very impressive. When you were first starting and jumping into this,
Yeah.
was it intimidating for you? Was it overwhelming? How did you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the first blood chemistry panels I was doing on patients. I'm ordering the blood chemistry panel. I'm like, I get it back and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. You know, Luckily, Apex offers some technical support, and I was able to, have them, the doctors there, help me, interpret some of it in the beginning as I'm sitting there with my functional blood chemistry manual and flipping through it and reading everything and trying to dissect everything out. So in the beginning, I'd get a panel of blood work back, and I mean, it could take me 2 hours to work up that panel of blood work.
Yeah.
And after I work it up, I send it to somebody else to have their eyes kind of on it because I wasn't trusting myself in doing it. And,
Yeah.
now I can take a panel like that and I can look at it in probably about 30 seconds or less. I have some idea of what's going on. You just glance over it. It's just so.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, if people that don't know, like Apex, we say Apex, there's a company called Apex Energetics in the US, and it's a nutraceutical company. And I was asked to create education and create a team for them. And we did some seminars on things like blood chemistry and functional endocrinology. And they're still doing those now. But with COVID and everything, I think they're trying to figure out where to do seminars and how often and what people really want. But they kind of were really, I think, doing close to 300 events a year all throughout the country. I think we had like 25 speakers at the time. Now, when you were going through and like going through blood chemistry, like do you like as an educator, because you ended up teaching hundreds and maybe even thousands, probably close to thousands of people over your how many years on the road teaching? 10 something plus years at least, right?
Mhm.
Um, what did you notice that it took? I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned is really something I've noticed. Tell me what your thoughts are on it. You have to be willing to just jump in. Like you just have to be willing to just order the panel and then get it and then go through it. So what you mentioned was like the step that most people don't start with, and that's like what hinders them from actually getting good, right?
That's the number one thing. When I would give a blood chemistry seminar, and I would just over and over and over just kind of put that out there. Go, the only way you're going to learn this is start doing it. You can sit there and you can study the manuals all you want. You can read. You can look at case studies. You can do, but the reality is you learn it from being in the trenches of looking at the blood panels, having a patient in front of you, looking at the history of that patient, marrying all the information together with the blood panel, treating that patient, having that full experience of walking it through is really what makes you that top-notch practitioner that's going to, really be able to dissect out blood work. There's no way that you can teach in a seminar everything about a blood panel. There's too many nuances and things of where there comes that craft of being able to look at a blood panel. And in the beginning, for many years in the beginning, I was very kind of, I would say, robotic, or, here's the manual and here's how I'm interpreting it. And so, it's like, this is the interpretation. But then you realize when you're a practitioner, it's a person is bigger than a blood panel. There's
Right.
so many more involved in that, and the blood panel is the foundational tool to really understand what's going on with that person. But then you got to take everything else into account as well. There's other tests that we need to run based upon a patient's history and evaluation of that patient. You start marrying all that information together, and you really start to learn the craft of it. But that takes time. You don't just start out like that. And the only way you learn that is by doing it.
And going back to as an educator, So we see a lot of people like hesitant to jump in.
Yep.
I want to ask you, like, first, why do you think they're hesitant to jump in? And then number two, we see people that would jump in, but they wouldn't really even read the labs. They just like do the same old stuff they're always doing. Like, oh, start with gut. Here's the 4-hour program, and it didn't even matter what the labs were. They just kind of ran it to think they did something. And those are like the two like extreme parts of
Yeah.
it, right? So what
Yes.
was that? What are your thoughts on that? So that was noticing. Do you see the same thing? As you notice something different?
Well, no, I saw the same thing.
Okay.
Uh, blood panels can be intimidating. I mean, I remember being intimidated when I first started, and I felt that I didn't want to run that blood panel until I had that knowledge. That was like in the beginning. So I'm running it. I'm not running it on patients. I ran on myself. I ran on my wife. I ran on mom, I ran it on all the family and everything like that. So I could try to learn. And then that's where I was like, okay, I just got to start running it on patients. And it was a difficult step because it's intimidating from the sense that I believe that I need to understand everything before I order that first panel. Otherwise, I'm doing an injustice to the patient, because I'm not a competent practitioner yet to be able to interpret blood work. But the reality is, those first patients that I ran blood work on, I helped them. We made a difference in some way or another. Now, I always said if I go and I look at my files, and I think I got this from you one time, you said this, and I'm like, it really stuck in my brain. But if I go back 2 or 3 years and I'm looking at my files, and I'm doing the same thing with my patients today as I did 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not advancing as a practitioner, right? So if I look back at those first people that I ran, I certainly wouldn't probably address their case the same today as I did back then.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I did not help those patients, back then. And so it was my own insecurities that kept me from doing it. And the only thing that got me past that was just running the blood works and doing it and interpreting it. And maybe it's on a basic level at that time, but those skills develop because you do it. And it's the only way that you're going to develop those skills is doing it.
Yeah, I understand. I know for me, like right now, I'm taping case studies, doing ground rounds, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be embarrassing to look at in 2 years. Do I really want to record these? But I'm like, oh well,
But
what it is.
that's the way it
That's
is.
the way
That's
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. So you started mostly with blood chemistry in the beginning, but you were doing adrenal profiles and GI panels and other types of diagnostic testing too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably the first year I was focused on blood panels, and then I started bringing other stuff in.
Yeah.
Um, but
And
I was yeah, just chemistries in the beginning.
and just from that point of view, what were your observations initially getting into this field of what was happening with people in the healthcare system, both conventional and alternative? I think when you start obviously doing diagnostic laboratory testing on people, especially something as standardized and routine as a blood test, what did you notice?
Well, as far as how it was received, or as far
As far as like what your
outcome.
face, like what did you think has happened? Like for me, I remember when I was a grad, and got into initially just routine lab work myself, like blood chemistry. I was really shocked at conventional medicine and how often things were missed and how like things are misdiagnosed, like anemia is given the wrong diagnosis and
Oh,
just completely overlooking metabolic patterns and then at the same time, and that was with conventional. So I had this feeling of like, what? And I didn't know that because I mean, when I was first in practice, I was in my early 20s. I don't know. You were pretty young too when you were
yeah,
first practicing, right?
yeah.
And it was like because I never imagined that. And I would never imagine I would see a full workup from like the Mayo Clinic or some of these prestigious places and go, what is this? Like what well, how could no, I'm what's
No,
happening? So
yeah,
did you have the same experience or what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, absolutely. You see like the number of people. I mean, again, you get a little bit of tunnel vision when you're first starting out because you get those certain patterns that stick out that you kind of follow and start treating. But let me tell you, don't underestimate it, because I can't tell you the number of people we just worked on their blood sugar. Right?
Yeah.
We just whether it was hypoglycemia or whether it was somebody that was starting into insulin resistance, they weren't diabetic, but they were starting down that road of insulin resistance. And you just make that shift in blood sugar for them, and it changes their life.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And so you see all these blood sugar type disruptions that take place in people that we can catch on doing screenings long before there's something that's diagnosable in the medical world. And you make huge changes. I mean, you have somebody who is reactive hypoglycemic. They're not diagnosable in the medical world. But in our functional world, we can see them tending that way. And you just know they're not fueling their body. They're not fueling the cells. They're not fueling their brain. And you just get them to fuel those cells of the body. And it makes a big difference. I mean, how can somebody go through a healing if they can't generate ATP because they're not getting glucose into the cells? So when we look at those types of basic things, even just starting out and looking at blood panels and just taking a few basic key concepts like blood sugar, you can make a huge difference in a patient. But It's missed all the time. And then not even to mention people who are diabetic who not even diagnosed. I mean, we can go to the more extremes as well.
Yeah. And what were your thoughts with preventive medicine? You what did you notice with practitioners that didn't run routine lab work and they had like theoretical models of nutrition and they've been working with someone for years and then you finally do a lab workup and you're like, oh, no one did this?
Yeah, I mean, I would see that all the time. I saw it much more when I started to teach.
Right.
Because when I started to teach and give seminars, you had practitioners who would go and refer patients to you. And they'd be like, this is my difficult patient. I've been working with this patient for 5 years. We haven't made a change. And then you run some routine blood work and you see, there's autoimmunity of the thyroid. There's a blood sugar issue. There may be some, adrenal stuff that's going on that wasn't caught, or there may be some chronic infection that's going on and they were being treated for adrenal insufficiency. And you can, these things pop out and it's like these aha moment. It's just like, nobody looked.
Yeah. So, Mark, let's just stay on the topic of you as an educator and things you were observing. When you were teaching and you were going from like one city to the next city to the next city, right? You'd be on like the circuit. And a lot of times, like you'd end up in the same city again. And a lot of times in the same city, you have a lot of, so many of the practitioners come back and maybe it's another course, maybe they're reviewing something and you get to know people in different cities, right? As a person on the inner circuit. What did you see was like the key attributes of people that really became successful and got it versus those that struggled?
I think that those that struggled were, I kind of look at it like, I think one of the most difficult type of practitioners to get to go to functional medicine is an MD. And it's because of the minds, the way they were taught. And it's just changing the mindset is very difficult. But I think that we have the other practitioners too, who maybe it was some type of muscle testing or some other type of testing that they do or in their practice, and they're stuck in that model. And they're interested in learning like the blood chemistry and doing that. And they may run a blood chemistry panel on a patient here or a patient there, but they're still kind of doing that basic model that they've always done and don't really want to commit to like really doing the testing. So you see these people that aren't they're kind of doing it, but they're kind of not. And those are the ones that are kind of not so successful at doing this type of work. The ones that are kind of committed and going, hey, I'm running at least I'm running a blood panel and everybody walks in my door because I got to see what's going on in the physiology. I got to take a look at that. Those are the patients that are the practitioners that are more successful. And then from there, they branch out into other testing because then they start to see the need, start to see these things show up on blood work and go, okay, well, now we got to look at this or we got to look at this. And then they get that more thorough testing. And those are the practitioners that are real successful at doing functional medicine.
Yeah, this bias was definitely a thing I for sure I see as an educator too. Like they're heavily biased and they just have a hard time transitioning. But there's also a level of insecurity. Like sometimes you wonder, like, just just like what's figure out your emotional issue and figure it out and just get started. Like take it to the next level. There's a point like you can't just there's people that go, I've taken this course 6 times. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why do you need to take it? Like, when did you implement? You haven't implemented. It's always had that
Right.
frustration. I'm like, figure it out. Like, you don't need to be at the seminar. You need to go to counseling. You gotta like get the whole patient to like jump in. There's a point you have to
You just
initiate.
have to jump in. Yeah.
You gotta jump in. You gotta jump in. You gotta like feel the stress of learning and being put in the environment, and that's how you grow. There's no way around it. Now you do that to yourself. So let's get back to you as a clinician. So you're 3 years into practice. You're starting to do the stuff. You're starting to notice some change with people. When did you have any issues with when you first started charging for time and scheduling patients? And how are you doing with that? Were you going over all the time? Were you following the normal things people do when they're not sure if this is like they have value? Or did you have any of those struggles?
I had like zero value, right? I mean, you helped me with that because one time we were having a conversation, and I think I don't know what I was charging, $50 an hour or something like that to do the work that I was doing, and you kind of sat there and you looked into my soul and you said, "Man, you aren't charging enough. You're not valuing for what you are doing."
Yeah.
And I sat there and I looked at you as sat there and looked into my soul and spoke to me, and that's where I was like, okay, I think you're right. And I remember I don't remember the numbers, but I went like something like I started at $50 an hour. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna raise my rates to $75 an hour. And I had this like think that I'm gonna go out of business. I'm gonna charge $25 an hour more, and I'm gonna go out of business because nobody's gonna want to come and see me. And when I raised what I was charging, I actually had a huge influx of patients. And I saw as I kind of did that over time and had more value of myself,
Yeah.
I was more valued by my patients. And another thing that happened to me that was probably worth more than the value of money of coming in of what you're charging was the quality of the patient changed.
Right.
I started to no longer look at my schedule for the day and going, oh, man, that person's coming in today. I know they're going to just suck the energy from me. And this is going to be a rough day for me. I started looking at my schedule and going, wow, this is going to be a great day. This is some solid patients that we got here today. And I would hear from my staff too. We'd always we'd have weekly meetings with my staff. And one of the things that just frequently came up was, man, we got some great patients. It's like, this is a great place to work. And that whole dynamic just started to change as I started to have more value for myself and what I did and the knowledge that I had and was sharing with patients.
Yeah, and then for me, when we had the discussion, and it wasn't you have had that discussion with other people too, it's because I went through the same thing personally, but also from my perspective, and probably the same perspective you got also when you were teaching hundreds and hundreds of practitioners in the circuit over the years, is like some of these people are really talented. Some of these people are really good. And if they're worried about like surviving, there's something wrong with the universe. If they're worried about their practice and being successful, there's something wrong because these are highly skilled people and
Absolutely.
very sought after, and people just don't know what they do, and it's almost like they sabotage themselves when they don't charge a professional fee. And we're not saying to gouge your patient, we're just saying charge a professional fee, and this happens a lot, like this whole self-worth issue, and I see it more with like people that do therapies, like chiropractors and acupuncturists who are used to treating someone. They don't really think they're value talking and consulting with someone that has any value. They think they actually have to do something.
Right.
And it's not as much with like an MD or someone who's come back, let's say, from a world of just charging by time. But for
Right.
people that do therapies, that I saw that was a big issue. And then the other key thing I think you brought up, which is a really good point, which I want to highlight, when your quality of your patients change as you increase your fees, and this is something I've observed, and this is something I've noticed other people mention too, because you start to attract more professionals and people that value their time and they value your time. And it's almost like when you like undervalue your care, people just cancel all your appointments all the time. They don't take you as seriously. And there's a point where you're like, I'm a professional and I need to have a professional fee. I need to have like professional cancellation policies and need to have like this is real. This is a professional office. The other thing I want to talk to you about, did you have any cancellation fees? One of the topics we talked about them in our group was like cancellation fees and
It's in my paperwork.
yep. People know
It's
that that
there.
goes.
The policies is outlined, and we remind patients of that if needed. But I'll tell you, I mean, I'm yes, I've had cancellations, but almost no cancellations.
Yeah.
And if I do have a cancellation, it's because had an emergency and somebody was in the ER or they had to go to the hospital because a family member or something like that, or a death in the family. We're talking about real stuff, not just I don't feel like going to this appointment today, so I'm canceling kind of things. But it happens so little, and it will happen maybe with the patient. It's been a patient of mine for 5 years, and it's the first time they canceled, and there's some family emergency. So we're not applying those
Right.
fees to it because it just doesn't happen.
It's true. I think that's what happens over time. And also, when you start getting really busy, they're like, "Oh, you missed your appointment. Your next time you can get in is in 7 weeks."
Yeah.
Sorry, you know.
Yeah.
And at times, unless there's an emergency, like obviously make an exception and find some way to work something out, or go and I think all of us do that. Also,
But like you said, you're getting people who are more professional, and more people who are more professional have more respect for a professional. So they understand that cancellations affect them and are less likely to do that as well.
yeah, and I think that's one of the things I think a lot of people that are going through the journey have a hard time understanding is that you have to have a professional setup, and you have to let know what cancellation policies are, what your fees are. There's always real life where you have to then apply things that are important. There's also times where you have to draw the line and go, yeah, you missed your appointment. Here's your fee. Can't get you in for 2 months. Sorry. And then that contains the vibe of your practice and your staff, and it's important to do. I've rarely had to, you kind of filter out those people, I think, as well. Yeah.
You do,
So
and it's much more enjoyable to practice that way. I mean, the reality is there's some people who they want the interaction with the doctor, but they don't really want to get well.
yeah,
Right. So a lot of those are a lot of those people are attracted when it's the barrier to entry is less, and then they want to be there more for just the interaction with somebody, but they don't really want to get well. They don't follow your recommendations. They don't really do what it needs to take, and those are the people that are really not committed that you start to filter out. And
yeah. So one of the issues is compliance. So what were you seeing with compliance issues in the beginning, and what are you seeing with the compliance issues you got into practice more?
So it's a huge difference in compliance. I mean, I almost can't say I don't have there's no issue with compliance, but the issue with my patients I currently have, they're very, very, very compliant patients. When you are doing a very thorough workup of a patient, and you can sit down with them and you can look at their symptoms and all their paperwork, the full workup that you've done with them, and you can sit there and say, this is what's going on, and you explain to them in detail why and how important it is. Those patients they're going to comply. They hear you. You speak to their soul, right? You go there and you really have that heart-to-heart conversation with them of the importance of the findings that we have, and they are ready to comply. Where if I'm doing a panel of blood work and that's all I'm doing, I'm not really doing a full workup of the patient, and I'm wishy-washy because I'm just not committed to the full case of the full workup of everything that's going on. The patient's going to be less likely to comply.
Yeah.
And so the deeper that over time that I've dove into somebody's case, and the compliance has changed with that.
So I'm going to play a scenario where you just finished a seminar, and I'm going to come up to you and I'm going to tell you what's happening. Okay.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Flannery. I really liked your seminar. It was really great. I really love functional medicine. I just can't get it to work. I just can't get my patients to comply. And, no one's taking this thing seriously, and I'm really confused. Well, have you heard
Well,
that before?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what are you doing to apply functional medicine?
Right.
Right? How is your office set up? And what I find is, if you're a chiropractor, you're probably there adjusting your patient, and you're talking about the blood work and what you just got back from them while you're doing the adjustments on them, and not sitting down and taking the time to really explain out functional medicine, right? So we have these people who practitioner or an acupuncturist who's doing acupuncture on the patient at the same time trying to talk about the blood work. So we have these um, practitioners who want to kind of marry these two things and do it at the same time. And well, I don't want to charge an extra fee for doing functional medicine because I'm already doing acupuncture or chiropractic adjustment on the patient. That type of setup doesn't work. And how do you have your entry of a patient? You have your form that's just the one-page form, and that's the only intake that you're getting on a patient. You have no thorough history on the patient, and maybe you don't have the information you need to pair with that set of blood work that you have and that you're doing, that you're calling functional medicine, to be able to help that patient. So that's usually when I have somebody who comes in like that. It's like I dig in. I go, what's the office setup? What's it like?
Yeah.
How's the workflow? How do you bring in a patient in? And
Yeah.
that
And
helps tell me a lot.
I think it really, for me, what I've noticed, it goes back to professionalism. Like, how are they carrying themselves? How are they organizing their time? How are they organizing their follow-ups? Do they have the structure and plan? How invested are they in the follow-up? Like all those things like make all the difference in the world. Like if you're professional and top notch and you're focused into what you're doing, and you like review the records in detail, and you go and give like all the possibilities of things that could be there in a clinical strategy, and then talk about how you're going to develop a treatment plan and how things may change, and you have really good notes and you're able to keep on track with stuff, then there's success. And people that have terrible workups, have office staffs that are terrible, or they try to run their office and it's terrible. They're always late all the time. There's always a big mess in their office everywhere they go. They're just themselves are a total mess. And then they're trying to think, well, clinically I would do this, and they don't even remember what the patient's last appointment was because their notes sucked, and they don't have good detail like follow-ups. Like, you're going to have a practice that never works. And it's not the concept of the clinical implication, clinical model. It's like you as the practitioner, right? It's like, so I've had many of those talks with some people one-to-one, and just go, hey, like, what are you really doing? How professional are you? Sometimes it's like charging way too little. Sometimes it's just, they don't even realize like being late with the patient is a problem. you
Yeah.
know,
I
like
mean, their time is as valuable as your time.
yep.
That's the thing. A lot of practitioners think of it differently. Well, I'm the practitioner. I can be as late as I wanna be. But the reality is, if I'm ever running late because something happens, or I do a lot of virtual appointments and things like that. So sometimes there's a computer issue or something like that, and I'm running late. First thing I do when I get on with the patient is, I am so sorry that I'm running late.
Yep.
Your time is just as valuable as my time. I realize that. I hope this time frame is okay for you. We can go on with this appointment. But I definitely going to say something to the patient. I'm not going to just walk in and expect that I'm 30 minutes late, and that's okay because I'm the doctor. Very
Yeah.
important.
That is very true, but I really love the way you say that. My time, your time is just as important as my time. I'm really sorry. You have that understanding with each other, because it creates a mutual level of respect. Then once they know that you respect their time, then they respect your time, and then it creates that level of mutual understanding of each other's importance of time, and how important, how that is moving forward. So that's really good advice there. When you were practicing, how many years, what year were you in where you felt comfortable? So you took a deep dive in, you jumped in, just started going into a functional medicine practice. Was
I'm,
it
I'm
the
hoping
first?
next year.
That's the answer I thought you were going to say. Because the same with me.
I think next year is the year.
Next year, I'm striving
Yeah.
for next year too. There's the point. You never feel comfortable. Like, there's always some level, like there's a level of confidence you have, I think, as you get old, as you get more years in the clinic, and you have this level of confidence that I think is felt more than anything you have to say. It's just how you conduct and talk to them.
there's different levels of it, right? Because
Yep.
I think that it's the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. You know, our
Right.
body is so, especially when we start just dissecting out the immune system. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, we've run all these tests for years. You know, we ran tests back in 2008, 2009. You know, today we're going, what the hell were we looking at? I mean, but you know, we use those tests and we help patients, and now we have a better understanding, and maybe we're not running certain tests anymore because we realize that maybe they weren't showing us what we thought they were showing us, you know. And so as we, you know, deeper dive, we realize there's so much more out there to learn, so much more to understand, that you know, I question all the time, am I doing what's right for this patient? You know, when I sit down and one thing when I teach, right, we're talking a lot about teaching and things. So when I teach practitioners, I think a very, very good point for a new practitioner to understand. There is not one way to treat a patient.
Right.
Now, you come in and you do this workup, and the way I approach a patient may be different than the way you approach a patient, which may be different than 10 other practitioners approach the patient. And it doesn't mean that any one of those approaches are wrong. There are different ways to approach a patient. So I think sometimes people get in their mind that there is that one way, and I got to figure out that one way. I'm going to screw it all up if I don't figure out that one way. And sometimes it's just like, man, just take the information you have and start treating the patient. And don't worry about should this step happen before this step or what. Just start to treat them and watch what unfolds, because there isn't just one way to treat a patient.
Right. And it's like ultimately the people we're all seeing in a functional medicine practice is a chronic patient. And a chronic patient has a vicious cycle and they have like a load of various physiological things. And ultimately you're just peeling off layers. And I think you can, you know, no matter where you start, you're peeling off some layers and you can make some change. And I think as you get more experience, you're like, if I start here, I'm going to peel off way many more layers than if I start here. Like you might start with stabilizing their blood sugar level. That would have far-reaching effects in many other systems than, let's say, hey, you know, their B vitamins are a little bit low. I'm going to give them some B vitamins. It may not be as profound, for, you know, for one person compared to another person. And I think that's like the ultimate skill is as we get older, we kind of like know where to start. And what is it? What has been your experience where you do a full workup and you're doing everything and you realize like this has nothing to do with a supplement. This has nothing to do with their diet. There's some serious things happening with their lifestyle, relationships, their environment that they're in that is really impacting everything. What and how often were you picking that up in the beginning and picking up now, and what do you do with it?
Well, there's okay. So it's certainly not picking up on that stuff in the beginning. You know, I was focused on doing blood work and things. I was so nervous about doing blood work and that, you know, you're not picking up on those things. As the years go on, you know, after a couple of years, you're starting to pick up on that type of stuff with the patient. But I wasn't maybe comfortable with myself as a practitioner to sit and have those conversations with the patients. So in the beginning, when I first started picking up on those things, I wasn't having a conversation with them. And it took more years for me to get more comfortable with myself to have those conversations with the patient. But, you know, I really realized I did a disservice to those patients of not having those conversations. There's a lot of patients who are in physiological distress because of their environment. And if they don't address whatever that is, you know, I had a patient who was working for a pharmaceutical company. She was an executive at a pharmaceutical company. So you don't get a lot of female executives at pharmaceutical companies. And she was probably making 700,000 a year or something like that in her position. And she had autoimmunity. And she would be at work and her autoimmunity would flare up and she would be debilitated. And we had this conversation. We figured out it's the environment, the stress that she was under with the job that she had. And she ended up quitting her job and her health was so much better. And she would come back and she would say, I am so glad I quit that job. You know, I can live a normal life now. And she had the skills to do that, she had the skills to do the job that she was doing. But you have this, do you push yourself at the level you need to push yourself for that job to have your health suffer? Or do you choose to make a change and a shift out of that? And live a healthier life. And, you know, when you see something like that, you know, it's a tough conversation to have for somebody to give up their job. And I'm not saying everybody has to give up their job, but
Right.
for her, that's what it was, you know,
Yeah.
at that time. And so, you know, there are people who are in abusive relationships. There are people who have traumas from childhood. There's so many different things that affect somebody's physiology that's just a barrier to, you can give them all the supplements in the world, you can make all the dietary changes you want to make with that patient, but unless you address those things, you're going to get nowhere.
Yeah, and I think for me, what I've realized is like everyone has some of that stuff, but it doesn't impact everyone the same way. Like you could have lots of people that had an abusive relationship or childhood or something. Some it really has a significant impact, some it doesn't. So just the fact that it's in their history doesn't mean like you stop everything. Uh, I think the key for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, was they just don't respond. Like, dude, you like this, like following these guidelines would have some impact on people. Like everything we're doing has zero impact. Like this is not a normal response. And I think it takes some degree of like clinical experience over time to really know like what normally would happen, even at the lowest effect, and nothing's happening. That's for me when I start to go there. I don't like to go there in the beginning because sometimes people had those things and their physiology is off and they can get to the point where they can recover and even address those issues when they're physiologically healthier. And you know, and other times they just can't.
But
So
that's part of the workup too, right? So it's, I mean, like for me, you know, in my paperwork, you know, you start to, you know, you don't ask somebody to, you know, open up all
right.
the closets and let everything out, but you start to you ask the questions that start to crack, you know, open the crack. So lots of patients will write a one word something about, you know, that there's some sort of distress or something going on. And so it opens the door for the conversation, you know, and then you can start, and you kind of feel that out. Is this the appropriate time to talk about this? Is it not? Is it, you know, and so you kind of start to go down that road and you make those notes. And so, you know, okay, maybe it's something we need to address right now. Maybe it's something we can make a note on, put it in the chart, and let's watch what happens and start to go down that road. But yeah, there's those varying degrees
Yeah.
of things. And
Yeah. And
definitely,
I think one thing that you're mentioning and talking about, first of all, was the, you know, as an experienced clinician, you realize you can, many people can have success with the patient treating it from different starting points and different applications. But then the other part of it is, I think I see this trend with experienced clinicians like yourself, is you always have a working diagnosis. How they respond, not respond to various treatments is letting you know more about them. And the treatment itself is not really a treatment. The treatment itself is also diagnostic, right? So as you do something, hey, what happened? Like you went off all these inflammatory foods. You have celiac disease, you have went off gluten, dairy, and cross-reactive foods, you still are not better. Why not? Because that would make a huge change with someone with full-blown celiac,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to get your input on is your practice and what lessons have you learned? Can you share about your staff, how to find good staff,
Mm-hmm.
when to let staff go? What are your red flags for hiring? What are some things you can share when someone's like starting their practice, building their practice, and they're starting to bring on staff, or they have staff and maybe it's toxic and they know it but not willing to let go? What kind of experiences can you share us about?
You know, I've been fortunate. I've only had to let one person go, but you know, with staff. So I'll kind of walk through my kind of the history with staff with
Okay.
you. Um, absolutely. You know, if I was to go talk to my younger self, you know, back in time, the time machine, and have one piece of advice, it would be to hire staff earlier. You know, when I first started, I was the front desk staff,
Mhm.
right? So I would go, I'd see a patient because I thought, hey, I didn't have money to hire somebody. And so I was that person that would go check people out in front and do the supplements and do the whole thing. And what a nightmare.
Mhm.
So to me, I felt like that's what I needed to do to save the money. But what I realized when I hired staff is the staff enabled me to generate way more money. So if I was there, I would never be afraid to like hire that staff, get that good person right out of the gate. Very, very important to separate yourself as the doctor from the front desk stuff that's going on. So that was the first mistake that I made. From that point on, once I realized how important staff was, I got really lucky with the first person that we hired. She was really good, and then she ended up moving out of state. And what I realized in having her there, and was I wanted to hire somebody, and I've always done this, always hired somebody for who they are. And when I go, and I not the skills that they have. The one time I hired somebody for the skills they have was the one time I had to fire the person and get rid of them. I hired a lady who ran a large dental office and thought, okay, she's working in the medical world, she's going to have, you know, the skills behind that. Absolutely did not work out. Everybody else I've hired who have left because they've moved or going to school or doing just different things is why I've lost the other staff. I hired, and the main thing that I was looking at with the person through an interview was empathy. When you have people who have chronic disease, that chronic conditions that they're dealing with, they're not going to be the happiest people in the world, and they're suffering, you know. So when they pick up that phone and they call an office, they want to understand that somebody can feel and understand what they're going through. So whenever I interview people, I'm always looking for, if this person has empathy in them, if I can see that within this person, I can teach them the skills they need to do. We got to order some labs. We got to, you know, type some letters for patients. We got to schedule some patients. It's not rocket science that a front desk person is doing in a functional medicine office. You know, they don't have to know functional medicine. They can learn about it over time. I always had with my staff like weekly meetings, and would have little educational things. So I'd start to teach them, and they would have an understanding and learning about the supplements and things like that. But you can always teach somebody that, but you can't teach a person empathy. And so over the many years that I have had staff, I've always had patients just make comments to me of how great my staff is and how they've enjoyed my staff, and they've never had a doctor's office with staff like mine. And one of the things that I do with my staff also is ask them, what is your experience like in a doctor's office? Most people don't have a great experience in a doctor's office. You call and you ask for something, nobody ever gets back to you, and they're short with you. And I tell my staff, take all that stuff, all your experiences, all your bad experiences that you've had in a doctor's office, and never do that here.
Yeah.
Make it a different experience for the person. Put yourself on the other end. How do you want to be treated at a doctor's office? Right? Yeah. And that's kind of been my approach. So, you know, most people that I've hired have never had any kind of medical experience or worked in a doctor's office or anything like that. My first office staff member that I hired, which was fantastic, people loved her. She was doing kids parties with animals. Like, she'd bring the snakes and the birds and stuff to kids parties and things like that. And she was looking for a different job to do. You know, that was her experience. But she had this personality. I mean, she did that work because she was very engaging with kids and so on and so forth. And that's why I hired her, for her personality, and taught her everything she needed to know.
Yeah, I've had some experiences. I'm gonna get you, see if you had any of these issues as well. So I've had staff where they had a lot of empathy, but it got to the point when I got to talk to them, they were completely exhausted at the end of the day, like depleted. I'm like, what's going on? They're telling me, like, their story is so sad. I don't know. And it's like, okay, wait, like, you got to draw a barrier.
You do.
Like, so it was important to teach them, like, hey, draw barriers. Say, hey, that's information you share with so-and-so, you know. I'm just here to make sure everything in your appointments and everything's organized well, and just kind of cut that off. And because when you want people to have empathy, but you also know they have empathy, they will like give it out there. And one of the red flags, by the way, that I've realized if that's happening is patients will come into your office really early, talk to your office manager, and then stay afterwards and really talk. And then if they have a lot of empathy, they'll just get in there and talk with them. And then they can't get to their work. Now they're behind. Now they're staying after hours to finish their paperwork. But one of the things I just want to point out that I noticed is empathy is absolutely critical. Like you talked about, having that healthy relationship, but also you want to like talk to them occasionally and go, hey, are you drawing border like lines with not to cross with them?
Yeah,
did you have that
absolutely.
experience too? Did you have that experience or not?
Yeah, not too much. I mean, you have the, I wouldn't say as an umbrella, kind of like, this was happening in the office on a regular basis, but we definitely had to have conversations about creating those barriers with certain patients. There are those certain patients that would come in and want to do that, and how do you get yourself out of that situation? And so I think that's where, having a weekly staff meeting, when you have some staff, or even if it's every 2 weeks, having some periodic type meetings where you can sit down, and that is part of the conversation, that kind of check in with everybody. How you doing? Are there any patients that are problematic? And then we can start to build strategies, based upon that, for, okay, how's best to deal with this? Let me help you. Here's some scenarios that
Yeah.
things to do. But I always said to my staff when we had these meetings, there's things, as practitioners, we generally get into this functional medicine or into healthcare because we want to help people.
Yeah.
And but a lot of, I forget what the statistic was. I want to say it was when I was in chiropractic school, they said something like 5% of the people that graduate from chiropractic school actually practice chiropractic. I mean, it was a real low number like that. I don't think it was above 10%, 8%, 5%, something like that at the time was statistic, because people don't know how to run a business. So they get out there and they realize that, okay, I got all this knowledge of being a chiropractor. I graduated with this license, but I don't know how to run a business. So there's the other side of it of, bottom line, you're a business. You have to run. If you don't have a business, there's going to be no patients to treat.
Yeah.
So you got to remember, there's this business model of where you got to have a good business model in place that's protecting you, that's protecting your staff, that's going to allow a business to thrive and be successful. And then there's that other aspect of it of, hey, I'm going to do the best I can and give to my patients.
Yeah, and I've heard the statistics too, and it happens with any kind of practice where people go into cash. Like a lot of dentists have a hard time getting going because they have to get so much loan debt. A lot of podiatrists, a lot of naturopaths. But I think part of it is it's not just the business. I think they just don't have the skills. Like, you have nothing to offer society. You're going to do what every other person does. You have no value. Like, you have to increase your skills to serve society too. But business is part of it, but it's also a skill level. So one of the things that we mentioned here, like with staff, one of the things I tell my staff, I've been so lucky to have such great people working with me. I say, if anyone's an asshole, just don't work with them. Like I said, your health is just as important as everyone else's. If someone's being mean to you, if someone is terrible, if they're an asshole and they first call for an appointment, like, just don't take it. If they're having issues, you're right, and the patient's always wrong when stuff like this comes up. So I trust you. You have to protect me, and I have to protect you. And that kind of environment has found work great for me. How about you?
Yeah, you do not want those like destructive personalities in
Yeah.
your practice. You absolutely have to stop it before it even comes in, and that's the conversation. That's one of those things you got to train your staff. You got to let, like you said, you let your staff know that. That's you got to make sure that your staff understands that they need to
Yeah.
filter that out. And
Yeah. And some people are totally different to your staff than they are to you as a practitioner. Like, to your staff, they can be a total jerk and, be short and everything. And they see, oh, how are you? And you're like, oh, they're wonderful. And then you talk to your staff, like, no, they are the devil. They're terrible.
I've been really, really blessed in practice in that, because we haven't had too much of that.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's just overall of the way you set up the structure of practice. I think weed some of that out. We had that conversation earlier. So I've been really blessed not to have to deal with that too much. But on the other side, we talked about how a lot of these people with chronic illness will come in, and they're not necessarily the nicest people. They're in pain, they're in stuff, but they're not mean either. They're not going and being terrible to the office staff. But the office staff will often talk about different people and watching their transformation. Right, as you help this person get better, and as they're not in pain anymore, you watch their whole personality change. They almost become like a completely different person, which is a really cool thing to watch with some of these patients as well.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine. I don't know if you knew them, but they would put difficult patients, they put a red sticker on their next to their name because they knew they were struggling and they knew they were chronic, that issues going on. And then they would only allow like one red person in the morning and one red person
I
in the
like that.
afternoon. And it was
That's fantastic,
just the way the office could
right?
coordinate with having a difficult load of people, and then they didn't feel completely drained either, and they kind of worked through it. And then they could lose the sticker over time, but once
Yeah.
they had the sticker, they had limited.
Red, yellow, green.
And again, like you point out, people are suffering, but if their impacts, their suffering and their attitude towards you, to your staff, to other people around you, create the energy that can be very unhealthy for everyone. And if your staff is depleted and you're depleted, you're just not going to be able to serve the people
And
that you're.
when you're dealing with chronic patients,
Yeah,
there is a certain level of energy it takes.
yeah,
And so if you're allowing these other patients that are that way to completely deplete you, you're not going to have the energy to really
yeah,
treat your other patients in a viable way.
yeah. And that's, I think, one of the other things I learned was just I've talked to assistants and staff as I just need to focus in on this patient. You got to handle everything else, and let me just focus in on this. And they're like, okay, I understand it. So they're not constantly figuring out, having to ask you for everything, and they're doing stuff, and that kind of environment that puts you in. So let's finish up with a couple of things.
Okay.
Well, number one, you brought up, what would you say to your younger self? So let's say you go back to when you were like committed, you're in it, you're starting to do this stuff, you have the overhead, you have the staff, you're starting to get things going, you're not really sure if this is right for you, you're still feeling through it, and then you could go back in time and give them advice, give yourself advice. What would you say?
Oh, wow. I definitely wouldn't be as hesitant as I was to dive into things. I would have dove into things a little bit quicker. I think I kind of just let things unfold a little bit. It's like I wanted to learn one thing and understand that before I kind of added like some other testing or doing things. I would have jumped into it a little bit more. And just because I think that is truly the best way to learn. And so I think I hindered my own learning process of kind of being hesitant. I would have valued myself more from the beginning. I think it was a little bit difficult for me because I did have that beginning part of being a structural chiropractor and kind of getting out of this is what I charge for an adjustment compared to this is what I'm charging for my time and knowledge that I have. That would have been, that also was a hindrance for me as well. I was kind of stuck in that mindset of you charge for the adjustment kind of mindset. I also would have focused getting better foundational patient education early on. I think that as I had better patient education that I could give out, one, I think I got better compliance from patients. I got more commitment from patients. I would just sit down with a blood work and look at the blood work in the beginning, and that was kind of my report of findings that I would go. And then as I went on, and I would write up other patient educational material, especially when we started doing more with lifestyle, not just focusing on supplements and a lab test. And I would put that together in a package and have a more educational report of findings for that patient. I think that there's nothing more important. I mean, the first appointment is important, gathering information and so on and so forth. But that key part is that report of findings, because that's where you're going to get that buy-in with that patient or not. That's where they're going to be committed or not. And it's like I remember this one patient that I had who he was in his 40s, and for 25 years he was on an antidepressant. He was on two sleep medications and an anti-anxiety, and he has an array 10 test that comes back with like 135 foods on it, right? And this guy says, I have no digestive problems whatsoever, and he doesn't even want to believe me that there's any food problems or anything going on there. And it was a very difficult conversation to have with this guy, and he wanted to walk out of my office right there at the report of findings. And I went there and I really just explained to him what was going on physiologically with loss of oral tolerance with him. And I said, look, give me a 3-month window, commit to me with this 3-month window. Let's just see where we can get, right? And there was a guy who didn't really even believe in functional medicine. He was sent to me by like a friend of a friend kind of thing. Shouldn't have ever ended up in my office in the first place. And, 3 months later, he's off of all 4 of his medications that he was on for 25 years, and he's feeling great. And it was all because of the conversation that we were able to have at that pivotal moment right there. He could have just walked away, and they wanted to add 2 more medications to the 4 that he was already on, and he would have been stuck going down that path. But I could really explain to him what was going on, and because of that explanation, it clicked in his brain, and he's like, okay, I will give you a window of time. Let's see what we can do. And so I think that's really, really important to understand that that Jedi mind trick, that reaching into somebody's soul, of talking to them and connecting with them at that moment and explaining to them, we did this workup and this is what we see what's going on. This is why you're suffering here because of this. Let's see if we can make some changes. And that's a very critical point. I didn't do that well in the beginning.
Right.
So those would be some of the key things, other than what I mentioned about, getting that right staff in there right away. That makes a big difference for a practice, and having that, another really important. And, I think that there's many different ways to practice. So like in the beginning, my ex-wife, she got in with a practice management company for chiropractic that sells packages, sell a $10,000 package, $15,000 package. And that works, that works for a lot of people. They do that. It just never resonated with me. It wasn't my thing. If I went down that path and I tried to do that, it would be so difficult for me to practice that way, because it just doesn't fit me and my personality. And for somebody else, they're going to do that, and they're going to be a very successful practitioner at doing that because it fits their personality. And so finding that there's not one way to practice, not one way to set up your office, but you got to do something that is right, that feels right to you, in setting that up. And so, a lot of people go down that road of different practice management stuff, and it's very good to get a lot of different ideas. Don't just have somebody tell you, hey, I did this and it worked for me, and think that that's what you have to do. And if somebody came in and told me, hey, packages is the way to go, you sell these packages, that just would have sucked me dry. Not my thing.
Yeah, and it also burns a lot of practices too, because they overpromise and then the reputation goes bad and they have some issues. And some people do it with high level of integrity, and some people don't. But that's a different story altogether. Okay, I always finish every with
do something true to you.
Yeah, you got to feel good about going in and be proud of your practice and your relationships you have with people. Ultimately, it's about relationships. And I'm really glad you pointed out how important the report of finding is. And the report of findings, I think, is the time when you're most sincere about what you see, and it's your chance to really explain everything to them. And once they see the level of skill you have and sincerity you have when you're competent, it's really easy for patients to ask questions and really understand everything. And then that's critical for compliance.
I mean, just in looking at it, because there's a lot of chronic patients here, right, who are not diagnosable in the medical world, right? They're in that no man's land in between, where you don't quite have a diagnosis things. And when you can sit there and you explain it to somebody, I mean, you get people that are just, they'll start crying in your office. They're so relieved that somebody has some sort of answer, and not telling them it's all in their head and they're making all this up, and, go see a psychiatrist for your problems. And so it's a very, very critical moment for a lot of patients with chronic disease there's sometimes the very first time they're having somebody that finds something on a lab test, not just telling them, hey, all your lab tests are normal.
Yeah, for sure. So we end each interview with, what your advice to new functional medicine practitioner, and what's your advice for advanced functional medicine practitioners? And what do you have to say?
So a new practitioner, I would say that, you got to just jump into the functional medicine. You got to just, I think the Crosby Institute is got a wealth of knowledge, seminars that you've done there. You've put together a lot of great material. seminars that you did for Apex Energetics. I don't know what the future those seminars look like or not there, but that's, some great foundational information that you've done there as well. And it's that educate, and take each time you take a seminar, start applying that. Don't wait. Don't think that you got to wait until you have 10 or 15 or 20 seminars and you've gained all this knowledge and now you can start to implement. Go and learn something, take a seminar and learn that material, and the next day start applying it in the office. Whatever that is, start doing something and move, because the only way all this information is going to solidify is by doing it and doing it and doing it. You can read all you want, I'm just not going to do it. So that's one of the big things for a new practitioner. Have don't sell yourself short. As the education that you get on functional medicine really starts to separate you from others, and you have value because of that. And so don't undervalue yourself. For advanced practitioners, I would say, I'll say the same thing I say to myself. If I'm not continuing to educate myself, then it's really time for me to look at, should I still be practicing functional medicine, right? We have so many advancements, so much more that's coming out in studies. We have information just month by month that comes out, that if we're not keeping up with that and advancing our skills, we can't keep up with the changing population. If I look back at just even 2007, forget about going to the 1950s and 1960s. I look back to just 2006, 2007, the dynamic of the patient that I'm treating today is so different than what I was doing back in 2006 or 2007. And if I'm not keeping up with with lab tests and understanding what's going on with physiology, there's no way I can treat the patient today that I was treating back in 2006. It's a different ballgame. So you have to continue with that education, don't think that you get to that point, I got all the information I need to know, and then I'm just going to be that practitioner, I'm going to keep sailing, because you're doing a disservice to your patients that come in next year and the year after that and the year after that, because it's a changing dynamic.
Yeah, that's great advice. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure we have to connect soon.
Yeah, sounds good.